Dr. Elias Mercer found the real witness crouched behind the livery stable with blood on his sleeve and a dead man's silver spur clutched in his fist, while rain hammered the alley hard enough to bury every track before sunrise. 1 hour earlier, the town of Mercy Crossing had sworn that Ruth Bell's brother was a killer. 1 hour later, if Elias spoke the truth, the most powerful rancher in the county would come hunting for the frightened boy, now shivering beneath a feed tarp. Ruth stood in the stable doorway with a lantern shaking in her hand, knowing one wrong word could cost her the livery, her family name, and the only man who had ever looked at her shame and seen courage instead. Before we begin, let me know where you are watching from. Leave your country name in the comments below. And if you love stories about courage, loyalty, and community, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. The storm came over Mercy Crossing like a black wall, rolling across the prairie. By sundown, the dust in the street had turned to red mud. Rain hissed on the tin roofs, drummed on the hitching rails, and ran in little brown rivers along the boardwalks. The church bell rang twice in the wind, though no hand pulled the rope. Horses stamped and tossed their heads in the livery, uneasy from the thunder. Far off, beyond the depot, a train whistle cried and faded into the wet night, as if even the iron rails wanted no part of that weather. Dr. Elias Mercer had been closing the shutters of his small office when the first gunshot cracked. It came from the direction of the livery. He did not stop to take his coat. He grabbed his medical satchel, shoved his hat low against the rain, and ran across the street through water already rising over his boot soles. A second sound followed, not another shot, but a woman's cry. Elias knew that voice. He had heard it in the mercantile refusing charity. He had heard it at church singing low, never loud enough to invite notice. He had heard it behind the livery stable, soft and firm, talking to frightened horses as though they were children. Ruth Bell. By the time Elias reached the livery yard, 3 men had already gathered under the awning. A lantern swung from a peg, throwing long strips of light across the mud. Near the open freight shed lay Wade Harlan, the railroad claims agent, face down with rain washing through his gray hair. Beside him stood Caleb Bell, Ruth's younger brother, white as bone, holding a revolver he seemed not to understand was in his hand. Ruth stood between Caleb and the others, one arm out as if her body alone could hold back judgment. "I didn't do it," Caleb said. His voice broke like a boy's, though he was 22. "Don't care. I found him. I picked it up because it was warm," said Silas Grady from beneath a black slicker. The words were smooth, but they cut. Silas owned the biggest spread west of Mercy Crossing. Half the town owed him money, and the other half wanted his favor. Rain streamed off the brim of his hat, but not a drop seemed to touch his calm. He looked at Caleb with a sadness too tidy to be real. "Sheriff's gone to Junction Bend," Silas said. "Until he returns, we keep the boy locked in the storage room." Ruth turned on him. "You will not lock my brother anywhere. A man is dead, Miss Bell. A man is dying if you keep standing over him," Elias said. Silas stepped back. Elias knelt in the mud beside Wade Harlan and turned him carefully. Wade's shirt front was soaked with blood, but the wound was not where Elias first expected. The shot had struck low and torn deep. Wade's breath rattled thinly. Elias pressed cloth to the wound, rain dripping from his jaw. "Help me carry him to my office," Elias said. No one moved until Ruth did. She came at once, her skirt dragging in the mud, and took hold under Wade's shoulder as if she had been born to labor through grief. Elias looked at her only a second, but it was enough to see the fear in her face. Not fear of blood, not fear of the storm, fear of a town that had already made up its mind. They carried Wade across the street under lantern light, with Caleb stumbling after them and Silas Grady watching from the livery door. Elias worked for nearly an hour, Ruth stood beside him, sleeves rolled, hands steady. She boiled water, held bandages, trimmed cloth, and followed every instruction without asking twice. Caleb sat in the corner, soaked through and shaking. Outside, the rain kept beating against the glass. Now and again, thunder rolled over the town, and each time Caleb flinched. Wade Holland woke once, his eyes open, pale and wild. He gripped Elias's wrists with surprising strength. "Behind," he whispered. Elias leaned close. "Behind what, Wade?" Wade's gaze shifted toward Ruth, then toward the dock window where the livery lantern glowed across the street. "Not the boy," he breathed. Then his grip loosened. Elias listened for a heartbeat that was no longer there. Ruth closed her eyes, but she did not weep. Caleb made a sound like he had been struck and buried his face in his hands. When Elias covered Wade's face, the room seemed to shrink around them. Silas Grady came in without knocking. Two of his men stood behind him, both dripping on the floorboards. His eyes went first to Wade's covered body, then to Caleb. "Well?" Silas asked. "He is dead," Elias said. "And did he name the killer?" Elias looked at Caleb, then Ruth. "He said it was not the boy." Silas's face did not change, but the room tightened around his silence. "A dying man in pain might say many things," Silas replied. "The sheriff will decide what matters." Ruth stepped forward. "And until the sheriff comes, my brother stays with me. He stays where he cannot run." Caleb lifted his head. "I want to run." "No," Silas said softly. "You already did your running when you left the freight shed with a pistol in your hand. I told you. I heard the shot and came out from the stalls. And no one saw anyone else." At that moment, something thumped behind Elias's office. The sound was faint beneath the storm, but Elias heard it. He had trained himself to hear the difference between rain and pain, between wind and the small, helpless noises people made when they hoped not to be found. Ruth heard it too. Her eyes moved to the back wall. Silas did not notice. "I will take Caleb to the storage room myself," Silas said. "No," Elias answered. That one word surprised even him. Silas' gaze sharpened. "Doctor, you are respected in this town because you stay out of matters that do not concern you. Murder concerns all of us. Then you should want order." "I want the sheriff." Silas studied him for a long second. "The storm has washed out the north road. Sheriff Bellamy will not be back before morning. By then, if the boy's gone, no oath of yours will save him." Ruth's hand tightened around the back of a chair. Elias saw what Silas wanted: panic. A rash move. Caleb running into the storm and making guilt look certain. So Elias turned to Caleb and spoke like he would to a fevered patient. "You will sleep in my surgery room tonight. The door has a lock. Ruth will keep the key. Mr. Grady might place a man on the porch if he chooses. That will be enough." Silas' mouth thinned. "You take responsibility for him." "I desire." Ruth looked at Elias then. Not with gratitude, with alarm. She knew what he had just done. Silas stepped closer. "Careful, doctor. Mercy Crossing remembers men who stand between justice and the dead." Elias did not answer. After Silas left, Ruth shut the door and leaned against it. The lantern trembled. Caleb whispered her name, but she held up one hand to quiet him. Again came the sound behind the office, a scrape, a muffled cry. Elias took his lantern and went out the back door into the rain, Ruth close behind him despite his warning. They crossed the narrow alley between his office and the livery. Water poured from the stable roof in sheets. Behind a stack of broken wagon wheels, half hidden under a feed-top, a small figure huddled in the mud. It was a boy of maybe 12, Mexican by the look of him, with black hair plastered to his brow and blood soaking his left sleeve. His eyes were huge with terror. Ruth gasped. "That's Tomas Ortega. He muck stalls for Mr. Duffy when trains come through." The boy tried to crawl backward, but his strength failed. Elias knelt. "Tomas, I am Dr. Mercer. I will not hurt you." The boy's fist was clenched so tightly, his knuckles had gone white. Ruth crouched beside him. "Tomas, it's Ruth. You slept in our hayloft last winter when the snow came early. Do you remember?" The boy's eyes flicked to her. He nodded once. "What is in your hand?" Elias asked. Tomas shook his head. Thunder cracked hard overhead. He startled, and the object dropped into the mud. It was a silver spur rowel, broken at the shank, engraved with a small letter G. Ruth stared at it. Elias turned his lantern toward the ground. In the narrow strip of mud beneath the livery overhang, not yet destroyed by the downpour, he saw boot prints. One set belonged to Caleb. Another was larger, with a deep cut in the left heel. Beside them was a smear where someone had dragged a wounded foot or dropped to one knee. Rain was already reaching for it, thinning the edges, turning proof into nothing. Tomas grabbed Elias's sleeve with his good hand. "I saw him," the boy whispered. Ruth's face went pale. "Who?" Elias asked. Tomas looked toward the street where Silas Grady's men waited under the porch roof. "The man with the black horse," he said. "The one everybody tips their hat to." Elias did not move. Ruth whispered, "Silas." Tomas began to shake so violently, Elias feared the boy would faint. He lifted him carefully, feeling how light he was, and carried him through the back door as the rain came harder. Behind them, the tracks beneath the livery roof broke apart and ran in brown streams toward the gutter. By morning, the storm had turned Mercy Crossing into an island. The creek south of town had risen over the bridge. The north road lay buried beneath wash and fallen cottonwood limbs. Telegraph lines sagged dead beside the depot. No sheriff, no judge, no way in or out unless a man cared little for living. Wade Harlan's body rested under a sheet in the church vestibule. Because Reverend Pike said the dead should not lie where the sick came for help, Caleb slept behind Elias's surgery door with Ruth's key in his sister's pocket. Tomas lay on Elias's narrow cot, his arm cleaned and bound, a fever burning under his skin. Ruth sat in the chair beside him, her chin lowered, one hand wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold. Elias had watched many people keep vigil. Some prayed aloud, some bargained with God, some talked to the unconscious because silence frightened them. Ruth did none of those things. She sat like a woman who had been waiting years for trouble to arrive and had no strength left to pretend surprise. "You should rest," Elias said. "So should you. I am accustomed to going without sleep. That is not the same as being fit for it." He almost smiled. Almost. The office smelled of damp wool, carbolic, coffee, and storm wind pushing through the cracks around the window. Elias moved quietly, checking Tomas' pulse, then the bandage. Ruth watched his hands. They were steady hands, broad and scarred, with a doctor's gentleness and a laborer's strength. She had noticed them before, though she had never meant to. Elias Mercer had come to Mercy Crossing 3 years earlier with 2 trunks, a medical chest, and a silence around him that kept most people from asking questions. He doctored ranch hands, delivered babies, set bones, pulled teeth when he had to, and accepted payment in coin, eggs, firewood, or nothing at all. He was kind without being soft. He listened more than he spoke. Mothers trusted him. Drunks feared disappointing him. Children liked him because he never lied on whether a thing would hurt. But he had never asked Ruth Bell to walk with him after church, never lingered when he brought medicine for her father's cough, never said more than courtesy required. Ruth had told herself it was just as well. The Bell name carried dust no rain could clean. Her father, Gideon Bell, had once owned the livery outright, along with 2 good teams and a pasture behind the schoolhouse. Then he signed notes with Silas Grady after a dry year. Then the interest changed. Then a receipt vanished. Then her mother died coughing in winter while Gideon walked the floor with guilt in his eyes. By the time Ruth was 27, she had become bookkeeper, hostler, nurse, and shield. Caleb was all she had left of a family that had once laughed loudly at supper. Now the town wanted him for murder. Tomas stirred and whimpered. Ruth set the cup down and leaned close. "You are safe?" "No," Tomas murmured. "He said he'd put me in the river." Elias looked at Ruth. The boy's fever words were dangerous. Fever loosened truth, but it also twisted memory. Still, the silver spur lay wrapped in cloth inside Elias's desk drawer. He had washed the mud from it himself. The engraved G was plain. Ruth stood. "We have to tell the town." "Not yet." Her eyes flashed. "Not yet? My brother is being called a killer before the church bell has even rung morning. And Tomas might not live to repeat what he told us. If Silas learns he is here." She took that in, and the anger drained from her face, leaving fear behind. Outside, voices rose on the boardwalk. Elias went to the front window and moved the curtain aside. A crowd had gathered despite the rain. Men in slickers, women under shawls. Silas Grady stood near the steps of Elias' office, one gloved hand resting on the rail. Reverend Pike was there too, his hat crushed in both hands, looking sorrowful and uneasy. Caleb's name traveled through the crowd like a match, passed from hand to hand. Ruth came beside Elias and looked out. "They have already hanged him in their minds, not all of them." "Enough." A knock struck the door. Elias opened it only part way. Silas smiled without warmth. "Morning, doctor. We have come to ask after Caleb Bell. He is asleep. Convenient. He is under my responsibility until the sheriff returns. And if the sheriff cannot return..." Wade Harlan was here on railroad business. "There are papers missing from the freight office. Money too, perhaps. A killing done in a storm has a way of growing uglier by daylight." Ruth stepped into view. "Say what you mean." Silas removed his hat as if addressing a lady in a parlor. "I mean your brother was seen arguing with Harlan yesterday afternoon, because Harlan accused our father of owing money that was already paid." "Paid? With what proof?" Ruth's mouth closed. Elias saw the blow land. "Proof? Always proof." The Bells had lost more to missing paper than to drought. Silas' gaze shifted past her toward the surgery door. "Let the boy answer questions." "No," Elias said. A murmur went through the crowd. Silas looked at him. "You place yourself in a hard position. Then I will stand in it." That was when Mrs. Abel from the boarding house called. "What if Caleb runs? My son works nights by the freight shed. Is he to be shot next?" Caleb had opened the surgery door. He stood behind Ruth, pale and hollow-eyed. "I won't run." Ruth spun toward him. "Caleb, I want to tell them. No good comes from talking to a crowd," Elias warned. But Caleb stepped forward. He looked younger than his years. Hair damp, shirt wrinkled, eyes full of the old Bell stubbornness that grief had not beaten out of him. "I argued with Mr. Harlan," Caleb said. "I did. He had papers that said we owed Mr. Grady more money. Papers I never saw before. I told him they were false. He told me if I had complaint, I could bring it to court. Then last night, I heard a shot and ran out. I found him down. The pistol was in the mud. I picked it up because I was a fool, and because I thought whoever dropped it might still be there." "Who else did you see?" Silas asked. "No one." The crowd shifted. "No one." The worst answer. Ruth's shoulders folded in by a fraction, but Elias noticed. He noticed everything about pain. Silas nodded sadly. "Until Sheriff Bellamy returns, Caleb should be held somewhere proper." "He is held here," Elias said. "This is not a jail. No, it is a place where innocent men are not beaten into confessions." Silas' eyes hardened. A sharp cry came from inside. Tomas, Ruth, and Elias both turned. They had shut the surgery door, but the boy's fevered voice carried through wood. "No, senor, please, I won't tell." The porch went silent. Silas' head lifted. Elias felt the moment split open. Ruth moved first. She shut the office door in Silas' face and dropped the bolt. A roar rose outside, but she was already running to Tomas. Elias followed, and Caleb stood frozen. Tomas thrashed on the cot, sweat shining on his brow. The spur broke. I saw. He shot him. I saw. Ruth took his good hand. Hush now, but outside, boots pounded on the porch. Silas' voice came through the door. Calm no longer. Doctor, open this door. Elias looked at Ruth. She looked back. In that look lived the whole cruel shape of their trouble. To protect Tomas, they had to hide him. To save Caleb, they had to reveal him. Either choice could ruin them. Elias crossed to his medicine cabinet and took out a small vial. Laudanum, he said. Only enough to quiet the fever. Ruth nodded. Caleb whispered, There's another witness. Tomas saw something, Elias said. Then tell them. And have Silas' men drag him out while the sheriff is miles away. Caleb looked toward the door, hearing the crowd, hearing his own name like a curse in their mouths. I can't sit while they think I killed Mr. Harlan. Ruth turned on him, fierce with love. You can sit if sitting keeps a child alive. The pounding stopped. For one breath, the silence was worse. Then Silas called, You have until noon, doctor. After that, the town will decide whether your office is a clinic or a hiding place. The crowd slowly broke apart, but two of Silas' riders remained under the awning across the street, watching. By midday, Mercy Crossing smelled of wet earth and accusation. The rain softened but did not stop. Water dripped from every roof. The livery horses needed feed. The stalls needed clearing. Caleb could not go outside without being seized. Gideon Bell was trapped at home with fever in his joints and no knowledge yet that his son stood one rumor away from a noose. Ruth had to return to the stable, but Elias would not let her cross alone. They went by the back way, through the alley where the evidence had nearly vanished. The mud beneath the livery overhang had been trampled, washed, and ruined. Elias crouched anyway. He found the deep-cut heel mark once more, faint but visible near a barrel, and covered it with an overturned crate. Ruth watched him. You think a boot print can stand against Silas Grady? No, Bot thought, but many small truths can make one large truth. That sounds like something a man says before losing. It is also how a man wins when he has little. She studied him through rain-glossed lashes. Have you had little, Dr. Mercer? He was quiet so long she thought he would not answer. Then he said, I had a wife once. Ruth's breath caught softly, not from surprise alone, but from the way he said it. Not as a confession, as a wound reopened carefully so it would not bleed on anyone else. Her name was Anna, he continued. We lived east of here. Fever came through one summer. I treated 40 people in 6 days. I thought I knew which cases could wait. I was wrong about hers. The livery was dim and warm, with the smell of hay, leather, and animals. Rain whispered against the roof. A mare stamped in her stall. I am sorry, Ruth said. So am I. That is why you never stay anywhere after supper. He looked at her. I notice things, she said. I know. The words held more than either of them meant to give. Ruth looked away first. She took a pitchfork from the wall and began clearing a stall with sharp, practiced movements. Elias removed his coat, hung it on a nail, and helped without being asked. He was clumsy at first, not helpless, but no hostler. Ruth corrected him once, then twice, and by the third time, he was doing the work properly. You need not do this, she said. Your brother cannot, and you are a doctor. I have shoveled worse. That almost drew a smile from her. They worked side by side as rain beat time overhead. The ordinary labor steadied them. Hay had to be forked down. Buckets had to be filled from the pump. A wagon team needed rubbing dry. Life refused to pause for disgrace or murder. And in that refusal there was mercy. When Elias carried 2 buckets toward the gray mare's stall, the horse shied. Ruth reached over his arm and caught the bridle. "Easy, Pearl," she murmured. "Storm's just making speeches, it has no teeth." Elias watched the mare settle under Ruth's hand. "You talk to horses like they understand every word. They understand what is beneath the words, and what is beneath yours." Her hand stilled on the mare's neck. "Fear," she said. It was so plain, so honest that Elias had no answer ready. Ruth looked at him. "I am afraid I will lose Caleb. Afraid my father will die thinking his name was worth nothing. Afraid Silas will take this place and call it business. Afraid every person in town who smiled at me last Sunday will stand aside if he tells them to." Elias set the buckets down. "I am afraid Tomas's fever will climb. Afraid the sheriff will not return soon enough. Afraid Wade Harlan died trying to say more than I understood. And what of yourself?" He looked toward the open stable doors. Across the street, one of Silas' riders shifted under the awning, watching, waiting. "I'm afraid," Elias said, "that I spent 3 years telling myself I served this town, when what I truly did was hide inside usefulness." Ruth's gaze softened. A gust of wind blew rain through the doorway. Elias moved to pull it shut, and Ruth helped. The wooden door stuck on swollen hinges. Together they shoved, shoulder to shoulder, until it groaned close. For one moment they stood too close in the dim livery, their hands still braced on the same plank, the sound of the storm enclosing them. Ruth stepped back, but not quickly. Elias wished he knew how to say what passed through him then. It was not the sudden fever of young love. It was quieter and more dangerous. It was the ache of recognizing another solitary soul and wanting, against caution, to stand nearer. A small clatter came from the feed room. Elias reached for the knife at his belt. Ruth lifted the lantern. "Who is there?" she called. A boy stepped out from behind the grain sacks. Not Tomas. This one was older, lanky, with a bruised cheek and a cap pulled low. Elias recognized him from the depot. Jimmy Pike, the Reverend's nephew. "Don't holler," Jimmy said. "I ain't stealing." Ruth lowered the lantern a little. "Jimmy, what are you doing in my feed room?" He looked at Elias, then toward the doors. "I seen something last night too." Elias and Ruth went still. Jimmy swallowed. "Not the shooting. After, I was by the depot, waiting out rain. I saw Mr. Grady come from the livery alley. He was leading his black horse, and the horse was favoring one leg. Mr. Grady told me if I liked my uncle keeping the church roof patched, I'd best forget the hour." Ruth's face tightened. "Will you tell Sheriff Bellamy?" Jimmy looked miserable. "I want to. But Uncle says Grady money keeps half this town from starving when cattle prices fall." Elias stepped closer. "A dead man cannot speak for himself. Thomas might be too sick. Caleb might hang. You must decide what kind of man you will become." Jimmy stared at the floor. "I ain't brave," he whispered. Ruth's voice changed softer. "Most brave people are not brave at first. They just come to the place where fear and truth stand on the same road, and they choose which one gets their feet." Jimmy looked at her as if no one had ever spoken to him that way. Then, from outside, a horse screamed. Elias flung the door open. Silas' black gelding stood under the far shed, jerking against a tie rope while one of Grady's men tried to calm him. The horse's left foreleg was wrapped in fresh cloth. Elias saw it. So did Ruth. A horse favoring one leg, a broken silver spur, a deep-cut boot heel, a dying man saying, "Not the boy," a fevered child crying that the man with the black horse had shot him. Truth was gathering weight, but proof still had to live long enough to be heard. That afternoon, Gideon Bell came to town in a borrowed wagon. Ruth had not sent for him. She would have spared him if sparing were possible. But news traveled faster than mercy, and her father arrived with a quilt over his knees, his old hat crushed in one trembling hand. He had once been broad through the shoulders. Now age, debt, and sickness had carved him down, leaving only stubborn eyes in a weathered face. He climbed from the wagon before anyone could help him, and nearly fell. "Since James squat here." Gideon looked at him. "They say my boy killed Wade Harlan." "They say wrong," Ruth answered, coming from the livery. Gideon's gaze moved to her, then to the riders watching across the street. "Where is Caleb?" "With Dr. Mercer." "Locked? Protected?" The old man gave a bitter laugh. "Same word wears two coats, depending who says it." Ruth touched his sleeve. "Pa, there might be proof." Gideon looked sharply at her. "What proof?" Before she could answer, Silas Grady crossed the street. He had changed clothes. Clean coat, dry hat, polished boots. To anyone else he looked like order restored. To Elias, he looked like a man preparing to bury a crime beneath manners. "Gideon," Silas said, "I am sorry you had to come this weather." Gideon straightened with visible effort. "I'll hear sorry from God or from Wade's widow, not from the man holding my notes." Silas' jaw worked once. Ruth stepped between them. "Not here." "Oh, I think here is exactly the place," Silas said. "Before witnesses. Your father has long accused me of dishonest bookkeeping. Now a railroad agent sent to examine those same debts is dead. And your brother held the gun." Gideon's face went gray. Elias watched Ruth reach for her father. She did not deny the pain. She braced him against it. Silas turned to the people gathering again along the boardwalk. "I propose we send riders south as soon as the creek falls. Until then, Caleb Bell must be confined in the church cellar under guard. If Dr. Mercer refuses, he declares himself no neutral man." A murmur of agreement moved through the crowd. Elias felt the old trap closing. Neutral, respectable, safe. The same words had followed him after Anna died. He had been told he had done all any doctor could. He had been praised for continuing his rounds, praised for not collapsing, praised for being useful. No one had known that usefulness can be a locked room. Ruth looked at him, not pleading, not asking. She had learned not to ask too much of anyone. That cut him worse than begging would have. The church bell rang once in the wind. Reverend Pike came forward. "Perhaps the church cellar is best until the sheriff returns. It would calm the town. It would put Caleb where Silas' men can reach him," Ruth said. Silas' eyes chilled. "You should mind your accusations, and you should mind your spurs." The words leapt out before she could stop them. Elias saw Silas' right hand twitch. The crowd stirred. Silas smiled slowly. "My spurs?" Ruth's face lost color, but she did not step back. Elias moved beside her. A broken spur rowel was found near the place where Wade fell. "Many men wear spurs, doctor," engraved with a G. Silas' smile remained, but the life went out of it. "You are making a grave claim," he said. "I am stating what was found." "By whom?" Elias did not answer. Silas looked from Elias to Ruth, and in that moment he understood there was a witness. His gaze shifted toward the doctor's office. Ruth saw it too. Elias spoke low. "Go!" She ran. Silas shouted, "Stop her!" One of his riders lunged, but Gideon Bell swung his cane and caught the man behind the knee. The rider went down in the mud with a curse. Chaos broke across the street. Elias shoved through bodies after Ruth. They reached the office as Tomas screamed inside. The back door hung open. Caleb was on the floor, dazed, blood at his temple. Tomas was gone. Ruth dropped beside her brother. "Caleb?" Elias checked him quickly. "He's breathing." Hit hard, not shot. Through the open back door, rain washed muddy tracks toward the alley. One set belonged to a child dragged or stumbling. Another had a deep cut in the left heel. Elias's chest tightened with cold rage. Ruth stood, face white. He took Toma. Caleb grabbed her skirt weakly. "Grady's man." "I tried." "I know," Ruth said, kneeling to kiss his brow. "I know." Elias took a shotgun from behind his cabinet. It belonged to his landlord. and had not been fired in years. Ruth stared at him. "You cannot go alone." "I do not intend to. I am coming." "No," her eyes blazed. "That boy trusted me. My brother is accused. My father's name is being ground under Grady's heel. Do not stand there and tell me to wait like a good woman while men decide how much of my life gets taken." The shotgun felt suddenly heavy in Elias' hands. He had spent years fearing the cost of choosing wrong. Ruth Bell had spent years paying the cost of other people's choices. He nodded once. "Stay behind me if there is shooting. Do not waste breath asking what you know. I will not promise." They found Jimmy Pike hiding beneath the back steps, shaking but alert. He had seen a rider take Tomas toward the old wash road west of town, the one leading to Grady's abandoned line shack near Cottonwood Draw. Elias saddled Ruth's mare and his own bay from the livery. Ruth packed bandages, a blanket, and a revolver Caleb had kept hidden in the tack room. Her hands trembled only once, when she took the silver spur from Elias's drawer and tucked it inside her coat. Gideon caught her at the stable door. "Ruth," he said. She turned. The old man looked smaller in the lantern light, but his eyes were clear. "In the black trunk under my bed, there is a Bible with your mother's letters. Between the pages of Ecclesiastes is the receipt Silas said I lost. I hid it because I meant to bring it out in court when I had enough money for a lawyer. Then your mother took sick and I lost my nerve. I thought if I kept quiet, she'd children some peace." Ruth stared at him, wounded by the truth and by all the years around it. "Pa?" I was ashamed. Her face trembled. Then she stepped into him and held him hard and brief. "Then be done with shame. Bring it to Reverend Pike. Make him read it before the town." Gideon nodded, tears standing in his eyes. Elias mounted and reached down to help Ruth onto Pearl. Their hands met, wet and cold. She swung into the saddle with the ease of a woman who had worked beside horses all her life. As they rode west into the rain, the town blurred behind them. Lanterns became stars behind water. The prairie opened dark and wide, grass flattened by storm, gullies running full. Wind drove rain into their faces. The horses fought mud with every stride. For a mile they said nothing. Breaths, hoofbeats, thunder. Then Ruth called across the storm, "Why did you come to Mercy Crossing?" Elias glanced at her. "That question cannot wait. It might be the only time you answer." He almost told her the simple version. A doctor was needed. He wanted quiet. He liked the prairie, but the storm stripped simple things bare. "I came because no one here knew who I had failed to save." Ruth absorbed that while lightning lit the plain. "My wife's sister wrote me after Anna died," Elias said. "She said grief had made me a coward dressed as a saint. I hated her for it because it was true. I could face blood, broken bones, fever, but not an empty chair at my own table. So I came west where work could keep me moving. And did it, for a time." "What changed?" He looked at her then, rain running down his face like tears he would not claim. "You asked me what was beneath my words." Ruth's grip tightened on the reins. Ahead, a light flickered near Cottonwood Draw. The line shack stood low against the storm, half hidden by bent trees. One horse was tied under a lean-to. A black horse. They dismounted behind a rise and went the last stretch on foot. Mud sucked at their boots. Elias carried the shotgun. Ruth held the revolver with both hands. Her jaw set. Through a crack in the shack wall, they saw Tomas tied to a chair, head slumped. One of Silas's men, a thick-necked rider named Lyle, paced near the stove. Silas himself stood by the table, removing his gloves finger by finger. "You are a child," Silas said to Tomas. "Children misunderstand what they see." Tomas sobbed. "I saw you. You saw rain, shadows, a frightened bellboy with a gun. You shot Mr. Harlan." Silas struck him. Ruth jerked forward, but Elias caught her arm. Her whole body shook. Silas leaned close to Tomas. "By morning the creek will fall. The sheriff will come. You will tell him Caleb Bell shot Harlan, or you will be found drowned in Cottonwood Draw. People will say you ran, because you lied." Elias looked at Ruth. There was no more time. He stepped through the door with the shotgun raised. "Move away from the boy." Lyle went for his pistol. Ruth fired first. The bullet struck the stovepipe with a scream of metal, showering sparks. Lyle flinched, and Elias drove the shotgun stock into his jaw. The rider fell against the wall and slid down. Silas turned slowly, his eyes fixed on Ruth, then on Elias. "Doctor, you surprise me. You disappoint me less than I expected," Elias said. Silas smiled. "I practiced lying for a man pointing an old shotgun with wet powder." Elias did not look down. Silas noticed, so did Ruth. The shotgun might fire. It might not. Silas reached for his coat. Ruth leveled the revolver at his chest. "Do not," he paused. "You would shoot me, Ruth? For Thomas?" "Yes, you always were Gideon's daughter. And you were always a thief wearing a gentleman's hat." His face darkened. Outside, another horse approached at a hard run. For one terrible moment, Elias thought more of Grady's men had come. But the rider who burst through the rain was Reverend Pike, with Jimmy behind him on the same horse and 3 townsmen following. Gideon had done as Ruth asked. The receipt had been found. The Reverend had read it aloud in the church with a shaking voice. Jimmy had stood before the town and told what he saw. Silas' power had cracked, but cracked power can still kill. Silas lunged for Thomas, drawing a small derringer from his sleeve. Elias moved without thinking. He dropped the shotgun and threw himself between Silas and the boy. The shot went off inside the shack like thunder trapped in a box. Pain tore across Elias' side. He staggered but stayed on his feet long enough to seize Silas by the wrist. Ruth struck Silas's arm with the butt of her revolver. The derringer fell. The townsmen rushed in, and Silas Grady went down under the weight of men who had feared him too long and were ashamed of it. Ruth caught Elias as he sank to one knee. Elias. It was the first time she had used his given name. He pressed a hand to his side and found blood, but not enough to mean death if God was merciful and the bleeding stopped. "Thomas," he said. "Alive," Ruth answered, already tearing cloth for a bandage. "You stubborn man, look at me." He did. The shack, the storm, Silas cursing, Thomas crying, Reverend Pike praying in a broken voice. All of it seemed far away for one suspended breath. Ruth's hands pressed against his wound. Her face hovered close, rain and tears mingling on her cheeks. "You do not get to save everyone and leave," she said. "I was not planning to leave. You had better not be lying." "I have been a coward," he whispered. "Not a liar." Her mouth trembled. "Then, live and prove both can change by dawn. The storm has spent itself." A pale gold light spread over Mercy Crossing, touching every puddle, roof edge, and wagon rut, as if the night had been washed not clean, but honest. The creek still ran high, but the bridge held. Sheriff Bellamy returned with mud up to his stirrups and found the town waiting outside the church, sober as mourners. Silas Grady stood in irons beside his 2 riders. His polished coat was torn. His left boot, when removed, showed the deep-cut heel that matched the print behind the livery. His black horse bore a fresh wound where a broken spur had gashed its side during the struggle near the freight shed. In Wade Harlan's satchel, found hidden under loose boards in Grady's line shack, were the corrected railroad papers and Gideon Bell's debt record, marked fraudulent, in Harlan's own hand. Thomas told his story from a cot in Elias's office, voice thin but clear. He had been sleeping in the high loft when he heard Wade Harlan accuse Silas Grady of forging notes to seize the livery land. Before the railroad spur came through, he saw Silas shoot Wade during the storm. He saw Caleb run in after, saw him pick up the drop pistol, saw Silas' spur break as he mounted in haste. Thomas had grabbed the broken silver piece from the mud because he was small and frightened. and knew grown men believe silver more readily than children. Caleb wept when the sheriff unlocked the surgery door and shook his hand. Ruth did not weep until Gideon came in carrying the old family Bible. The receipt lay between its pages, creased and yellow but real. Ruth held it as if it were both paper and bone. "I should have trusted you with it," Gideon said. She touched his cheek. "You should have trusted yourself." The old man bowed his head. "I am trying now." The town changed slowly, because towns, like people, do not become righteous in a single sunrise. Mrs. Abel brought broth and apologized to Caleb with more fussing than grace, but apology all the same. Reverend Pike stood in the church pulpit and confessed that fear of losing Grady's money had made him slow to defend the truth. Jimmy Pike sat in the front pew, bruised by his own courage, and stared at his boots while folks patted his shoulder. Wade Harlan was buried 2 days later on a hill east of town, where the prairie grass bent in a clean wind. His widow arrived on the noon train, a small woman in black with a child's hand in hers. Ruth gave her the gentlest room above the livery and would take no payment. Elias, pale but standing, told the widow her husband had died trying to set right a wrong. It was not enough. Such words never are. But they were true, and truth was the least mercy Crossing owed the dead. Elias's wound kept him in bed for 6 days. Ruth came each morning with coffee, broth, and a sternness that fooled no one. She changed the bandage because his hands, steady on everyone else, became impatient on himself. She read the newspaper aloud badly because she disliked every editor west of St. Louis. She scolded him for rising too soon, and then helped him stand when pride made him try anyway. On the 4th evening, rain clouds gathered again, softer this time, violet along the horizon. Elias sat by the open window of his office with a blanket over his knees. Across the street, the livery doors stood wide. Caleb was leading a team inside. Gideon sat on a chair beneath the awning, polishing harness buckles with the dignity of a man reclaiming work. Thomas, arm in a sling, carried a bucket half full because Ruth had forbidden him to lift more. Ruth came in without knocking, as she had begun to do. "I brought your supper," she said. "You brought enough for 3 men. You nearly got yourself killed. It gives a woman a right to overfeed you." He smiled then, truly. It changed his face so much, she looked away. She set the tray down and moved to the window. "The railroad man who came today says the spur line will still pass near the livery. Tom, I keep the place." "Good. Caleb wants to add a blacksmith shed." "He should." Thomas asked if he might sleep in the loft regular, in exchange for chores. "Will you let him? He already moved his blanket." Elias laughed softly, then winced. Ruth turned. "Serves you right." Silence settled, but it was no longer empty. It had warmth in it, like a room after lamps are lit. After a while, Ruth said, "I owe you thanks." "No, yes." He looked at her. "Do not thank me for doing what should have been done. That is exactly what deserves thanks in a town where so many did not." He accepted that because she needed him to. Then she drew the broken silver spur from her pocket. It had been cleaned, but the engraved G remained dark in the cut lines. "Sheriff said I could keep it until the trial," she said. "I thought I would hate looking at it, but I do not. It reminds me that small things matter. A boy's courage, a boot print, a receipt hidden in a Bible, a doctor who listened when a dying man whispered." Elias looked down at his hands. "Anna used to say the same, that small things matter." Ruth came closer. "Tell me about her." He closed his eyes briefly. No one in Mercy Crossing had ever asked him that without hunger for gossip. Ruth asked as if making room at the table for all that had shaped him. So he told her. He told her Anna had loved apple blossoms, though none grew well where they lived. He told her she sang while kneading bread and hated being told to rest. He told her he had spent years believing that to love again would betray the dead. Ruth listened until the first soft rain began tapping the sill. Then she said, "My mother told me, grief is not a locked room. It is a house with windows. Some days the windows stay shut. Some days someone opens one." Elias looked at her. "Have I opened one?" he asked. Ruth's eyes shone, but her voice was steady. "You found me standing in a storm, holding my family together with both hands. You did not tell me to be less afraid. You stood beside me and were afraid too. That opened more than a window." He reached for her hand slowly, giving her all the time in the world to refuse. She did not. Their fingers met in the lamplight. No vow was spoken. No kiss rushed in to tidy what still deserved reverence. It was only a hand held between two people who knew the cost of trust and chose it anyway. Weeks passed and Mercy Crossing healed in visible and invisible ways. The trial was held in Junction Bend after the roads dried. Silas Brady's money bought lawyers, but not silence. Tomas testified with Ruth, seated where he could see her. Jimmy Pike spoke with his uncle's hand on his shoulder. Gideon Bell placed the old receipt on the judge's table. Elias gave his account plainly, without anger, though his scar pulled when he stood too long. Caleb was cleared before the whole court, and when the words were spoken, Ruth bowed her head until Elias felt her tears fall on the back of his hand. Silas was sentenced to prison, and the forged notes were struck down. Land he had taken by fraud was open to claims and settlements again. Mercy Crossing did not become perfect. Men still argued in the saloon. Cattle still broke fences. Dust still came when rain stayed away too long. But something had shifted. Folks looked one another in the eye a little more often. The church roof was repaired by neighbors instead of one rich man's pride. The livery sign was repainted in blue letters. Bell and Son. Feed, stable, and honest teams. By autumn, the prairie turned gold. Elias rode out more often to ranches beyond town, and Ruth sometimes went with him when a woman in labor needed steady hands or a child with fever needed watching through the night. They crossed miles of open grass beneath skies so wide they made sorrow feel smaller. They shared biscuits from a cloth bundle. They argued over whether Pearl was smarter than Elias Bay. They stopped once at a rise where the wind bent the buffalo grass, and Elias showed Ruth where he hoped to build a house someday, not too far from town, with a porch facing east. "Someday," she asked, "if a certain livery woman can bear marrying a doctor who keeps poor hours and worse accounts." She looked across the land, her bonnet ribbons moving in the wind. "I would not marry a man for his accounts. No, no. I would marry him if he knew when to stand in a hard place and when to let me stand there with him." Elias took off his hat. "Ruth Bell," he said, voice roughened by more feeling than polished, "I loved once, and losing her made me think my heart had become a grave. Then I watched you hold a lantern in a storm, defend your brother, comfort a frightened child, forgive your father, and tell the truth when every lie would have been easier. I do not love you because you healed what was broken in me. I love you because you made me want to live honestly with what remains." Ruth's eyes filled. "I have been tired a long time," she said. "Tired of being brave because no one else would be. Tired of carrying the Bell name like a debt. But when you look at me, I do not feel like a burden someone left behind. I feel like a woman coming home to herself." He stepped closer. This time, when he took her hand, she came willingly into his arms. Their first kiss was gentle and unhurried, with the prairie wind around them, and the town waiting small in the distance. It did not erase griefs. It did not promise storms would never return. It promised only that when they did, neither would stand alone. They married in the little white church before winter. Tomas stood beside Caleb in a new shirt too stiff at the collar. Gideon walked Ruth down the aisle, leaning on his cane, but standing tall enough that people remembered the man he had been before death bent him. Reverend Pike's voice trembled only once. Jimmy rang the bell so hard, the rope burned his palms. Ruth wore no silk, no lace from back east. She wore a cream dress she had stitched herself by lamplight, with tiny blue flowers at the cuffs. Elias wore his good black coat and carried in his pocket a folded letter he had written to Anna's sister. In it, he had finally told the whole truth. That grief had made him run. That love had made him stop. That he hoped forgiveness could travel both directions across time. After the wedding supper, when lanterns glowed in the livery yard and fiddles played under the awning, Elias found Ruth standing near the alley where it had all begun. The mud was long dry now. Fresh straw lay stacked against the wall. Pearl dozed in her stall. Above the stable roof, stars had come out sharp and bright. Ruth held the broken silver spur in her palm. "I thought you gave that to the sheriff," Elias said. "He returned it after the trial. Said it had done its duty. What will you do with it?" She walked to the post beside the livery door, where a new iron nail had been driven. Hanging there was a small wooden box with a glass front. Inside lay the spur, the forged receipt marked void, and a scrap of cloth from Tomas's torn sleeve. Elias read the little sign Caleb had painted beneath it. "Small truths save lives." Ruth slipped her hand into Elias. "I want every traveler who comes through here to know this place remembers." The night wind moved through the alley, carrying the smell of hay, rain-washed earth, and distant wood smoke. Somewhere beyond town, a train whistle sounded steady and lonely, then softened into the prairie dark. Elias looked at his wife standing in lantern light, no longer bowed beneath shame, no longer alone in courage. He thought of the night he had found Tomas behind the livery, before the storm washed the evidence away. He thought of how close truth had come to drowning. He thought of Ruth's hand shaking around a lantern and how, even then, she had not let it fall. He lifted her fingers to his lip. The storm had taken tracks, mud, fear, and lies down into the gutters. But it had left behind what mattered: a boy alive, a brother freed, a town humbled, a father forgiven, a doctor brave enough to open his heart again. And Ruth, at last, with a home that no dishonest man could steal, standing beneath the livery lantern while the prairie wind moved softly around them, like a blessing.